Week 1 of the 2025 NFL season is just 24 hours away from kickoff, which means that you guys need to have the absolute best fantasy lineups together. So in today's video, we're going to break down 8 players that are set to go absolutely nuclear in week 1 of fantasy football. These are players with extreme upside, matchups that you absolutely can't ignore, and ultimately players that have to be in your starting lineup if you want to dominate your league mates in week 1. Let's start with wide receiver T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals getting a smash matchup against the Cleveland Browns, who allowed the 23rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last season. And ultimately, in this matchup, the point of the message here is to start basically every player. We have 2 very poor defenses between the Bengals and the Browns here in week 1. And ultimately, this should be one of the best overall matchups when it comes to fantasy points scored in week 1. And real life actual football points scored as well. And T. Higgins is in a prime position to come out in week 1 and have a massive week. And I think that a lot of people are obviously going to be focused on Jamar Chase, even guys like Chase Brown, Joe Burrow. And I mean, that's how it is week to week when it comes to T. Higgins. He is often forgotten about, kind of just that wide receiver 2 on your team, maybe even a flex option for some of you guys who you don't always have the utmost confidence in. And we saw that throughout the course of draft season. People were still a little bit hesitant to draft T. Higgins because of some of the inconsistencies over the past 2 seasons, but you can't forget this is a player who averaged over 18 fantasy points per game last year, and he was still on an incredible pace when healthy last year. When he really put his numbers next to Jamar Chase's numbers last year, he was almost as productive from a fantasy standpoint. T. Higgins is in line for a monster week 1 game in a matchup that once again is going to be very good overall for fantasy football. And this is still one of the best overall targets on this offense, hands down. And just don't forget, at the end of the day, the defensive pressure still has to, to its best ability, cover Jamar Chase first and foremost. This is just one of those situations where it feels like T. Higgins is in prime position to score a touchdown and have a ton of upside in week 1. And the early schedule here for the Bengals is pretty favorable overall. I don't think that these big performances are going to go anywhere for T. Higgins anytime soon. So if Higgins is on your roster, you absolutely cannot bench him going into week 1. Next up, I am all in on the Emeka Egbuka rookie hype for week 1. I've gone a little bit back and forth with this one, trying to be a little bit cautious as the week started to progress, but I am backpedaling to where I was early in week 1 preparation. I'm all in on Emeka Egbuka as an extremely strong flex option in week 1. Mike Evans is going to be a fantastic option. If you own Mike Evans, you know that you're starting him anyways, and this matchup is very favorable for both Evans and Egbuka. But we look at last season, the Falcons allowed the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and the 2 matchups between the Falcons and Buccaneers were prime fantasy football matchups last year. And you look at the makeup of this roster for both the Falcons defense and the Buccaneers defense heading into week 1. We should be in line for, once again, one of the best overall matchups when it comes to fantasy points scored between these 2 teams, and probably real life points scored as well. The Bucs on the road here, missing their starting tackle Tristan Wirfs, missing Chris Godwin, maybe missing Cade Otton. This is going to be a position with also Rachaad White, the running back position, pass catching running back potentially here behind Bucky Irving going into the week, questionable as well. It's a position where Egbuka is going to have to be relied on in an offense that's going to be a throw the football first and foremost offense. I just have one of those feelings there's going to be plays drawn up for Egbuka in this matchup near the red zone. And I know that's Mike Evans' place to shine, right? But I feel like, the defensive pressure is going to be on Mike Evans at times in this game. It's going to open up things for Emeka Egbuka in his first NFL start. If you own him, I think he's one of the strongest flex options possible going into week 1. I'm not going to overthink this one. The matchup is there. The game script is there. And Egbuka is in line for a great first NFL start in his rookie season. If you own him, fire him up. He is set to go nuclear in week 1. I'm going to double down on that confidence in Emeka Egbuka in week 1 and head straight to Underdog to take the over on Egbuka to score a touchdown against the Falcons. All new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH, that link is down below, are going to get a free NFL Pick'em to use towards week 1 NFL action. Take that free Pick'em, take Egbuka to score a touchdown, and when both of those hit, you'll automatically double your cash entry. Plus, all new users who sign up on Underdog using that promo code THECATCH, once you play through $5 on Underdog, they are going to give you $50 to use towards week 1 NFL action. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH. That link is down below if you guys want to take advantage of all of their week 1 exclusive offers. Next up is Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. And this is a player I've gone a little bit back and forth on throughout the course of the week, but my initial gut feeling going into week 1 is like, Ricky Pearsall is an absolute must-start wide receiver because there's so many injuries to the wide receiver core for the Niners heading into week 1. And now that we're a little bit further into getting closer to Sunday, like we are seeing a better possibility of Jauan Jennings playing, maybe even players like Russell Gage being available. But early last week, it was looking like Ricky Pearsall and Sky Moore at the wide receiver position. And I mean, we do understand here that George Kittle is going to get receiving work, obviously, at the tight end position. Christian McCaffrey is going to have his involvement at the running back position. But ultimately, whether Jauan Jennings is ready or not, or Russell Gage, whoever's left on this wide receiver core, right? Ricky Pearsall is just going to be in line for a massive amount of volume in week 1. And it's not the greatest matchup because, the Seattle Seahawks do have a good number 1 corner in Witherspoon. And that's kind of been my fear here is like, the Seahawks don't need to worry about covering anybody at the wide receiver position except for Ricky Pearsall. And maybe that defensive pressure doesn't lead to a massive amount of upside. But I just think regardless that the upside is far too high for Ricky Pearsall because there's going to be so much hyper target action in this game from quarterback Brock Purdy. And I actually think that overall the game script could be pretty good here, a little bit more competitive between the Niners, and the Seahawks than some people are anticipating. So I think Ricky Pearsall, a great flex option going into week 1, who actually does have a really good upside just due to sheer volume overall. So I would say Ricky Pearsall, a guy who is on a lot of you guys' potential benches or in and out of the flex right now based on where he was drafted in draft season. He's a guy who you have to get in your starting lineup here in week 1. Moving to some running backs, let's start with Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers on the road in week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who allowed the 27th most fantasy points to opposing running backs last season. And ultimately, this is one of those matchups that I am looking heavily at in week 1 between the Jags and the Panthers because we have a lot of very solid matchups when it comes to fantasy points allowed really across the board at every position, essentially for both teams. And I think a lot of people still kind of viewing Chuba Hubbard as like a low end RB2, and I don't really understand that because he still was really good last season, and the Panthers have a pretty solid offensive line, and they should continue to make strides in Bryce Young's 3rd season overall with Dave Canales as a head coach. And ultimately, we saw some of those, late season strides come to place with Bryce Young last year. And now we have a good rookie wide receiver in T-Mac, right? There's a lot to like about this Panthers offense, even with the sad injury to Jalen Coker and Adam Thielen being traded away right before that injury. There's still enough here against a soft defense like Jacksonville that this should be a good day for the Panthers. Plus, they're going to need to score some points in this game because I don't know that their defense is going to be able to keep up with the Jaguars' offense. I think that there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. So don't overthink this one. This is a smash spot for Chuba Hubbard. He's a strong flex option this week. He is a fantastic RB2 who could have a massive game and go absolutely nuclear in week 1. Another running back who I think is set to absolutely go nuclear in week 1 is Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks at home against a San Francisco 49ers defense that allowed the 30th most fantasy points to opposing running backs last year. This is a smash spot if you own Kenneth Walker, and I've talked about Kenneth Walker a tremendous amount throughout the course of the offseason, and I think Zach Charbonnet is one of the most elite handcuff running backs in fantasy football. But what we do know for week 1 is that Kenneth Walker is going to be healthy, going to be good to go, and that is the knock against Kenneth Walker is he'll probably have some sort of injury that will limit him throughout some time period this season, but it's week 1. He's going to be good to go. He's at home. It's a smash matchup. This is a player that had over 16 fantasy points per game last season, and this is a new offensive system under offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who is notorious for being amazing when it comes to fantasy football running backs. Last 2 seasons, his starting running backs were Alvin Kamara, the RB9, and Christian McCaffrey in 2023, the RB1. This is a run-first system that has allowed for a ton of fantasy points over the last few years to the running back position. This is a great spot for Kenneth Walker. He is, once again, one of these players who kind of gets mixed into like low-end RB2s, and maybe we will see some injuries pop up throughout the season, but here in week 1, I'm not worried about it. He is a player who needs to be absolutely locked into your starting lineup. Speaking of Alvin Kamara, I think he's an absolute must start as well here in week 1, going up against the Arizona Cardinals at home, who allowed the 29th most fantasy points to the position last year. And I will go ahead and say James Conner is also a smash start against the Saints defense, but I think that's going to be kind of the common theme with this matchup. But I think that Alvin Kamara shouldn't be overlooked just because Spencer Rattler is the starting quarterback. Maybe he'll play poor enough that we see some Tyler Shuck. Only time will tell. But I think ultimately, when you break down Alvin Kamara, a lot of the games last year when we had no Derek Carr and when we had Spencer Rattler or Tyler Shuck, we still saw 4 or more receptions for Alvin Kamara in each and every one of those games. And this is a player that feeds off of those dump offs and gets a lot of PPR style action. And I still think that's going to be the case in 2025, even if there is poor quarterback play. And at the end of the day, this is going to be a game script where the Saints are going to be playing from behind is what I would guess. And they're going to have to be keeping up with the Cardinals. They're going to be needing to throw the football. And Alvin Kamara is one of the top receiving options on this team. And I'm not knocking Chris Olave and or Rashid Shaheed, but Kamara's involvement in the passing game will certainly be there. And the PPR upside is just huge due to the game script and still due to the matchup against the Cardinals, who were very poor against opposing running backs last year. So don't overlook Alvin Kamara or kind of look at the matchup and be like, oh, man, the Saints are a very poor team. Everyone's expecting them to have a very poor week 1. Rattler's a quarterback. Can I start Alvin Kamara? The answer is still yes. The PPR upside is 110% there, and the matchup is absolutely incredible in week 1. You cannot bench Alvin Kamara. All right, and you might be saying those players felt like too obvious of must starts. They were all in your starting lineup already. Let's break down 2 players who are kind of hanging around in that bench area for sure, starting with wide receiver Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. And this is a matchup that I have been a little bit hesitant on throughout early preparation for week 1. But ultimately, I think we have to look at this one and just admit that the Minnesota Vikings defense, while it's very good, in terms of getting after the quarterback, it's still a good run defense. They were god-awful against opposing wide receivers last year, allowing the 31st most fantasy points to the position. And this is just one of those moments similar to Emeka Egbuka in his matchup, where I feel like in this matchup, DJ Moore is going to be taking a lot of the defensive pressure, and that's going to open up things probably early and often for Rome Odunze. And I just have one of those feelings he's going to get into the end zone and be able to build off of that stat line. And once again, I do feel like this is going to be a very competitive matchup at the end of the day. So I really like Rome Odunze for that reason. Going into this week 1 matchup, I think he's obviously the clear-cut number 2 receiving option. Some would argue maybe the number one receiving option in this offense. I think this is going to be one of those games where the Vikings will have plenty of opportunity to get after Caleb Williams. He's going to need to get rid of the football quickly, and Odunze is going to turn into that true security blanket in this Ben Johnson system. And once again, while I've been hesitant on this matchup, the wide receivers for the Bears are really starting to grow on me going into week one here, because let's face it, this Vikings secondary is very poor on paper and was very poor last year, once again allowing the 31st most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So if you own Odunze, I think he is a strong flex in week one who could find the end zone and end up with a nuclear stat line. Last player that we're going to talk about is J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos, who gets the Tennessee Titans at home, who allowed the 21st most fantasy points to opposing running backs last year. And this one is a little bit risky because we do have rookie RJ Harvey looming around in this backfield as well. And there's going to be some sort of split here. But my gamble for week one and my belief for week one when it comes to the Broncos running backs is that J.K. Dobbins is going to see the most volume of both running backs in this matchup. Being the veteran presence here, they're going to start the season early with more J.K. Dobbins, and as the season progresses, maybe we'll see more R.J. Harvey get opportunities. And once again, kind of similar to Kenneth Walker, like the knock with Dobbins is like we know he's going to be limited at some point this year due to injury, but it's week one. He's going to be good to go. You can fire him up and not have to worry about the injury concerns. And I have one of these feelings. While the Titans defense were good in some regard last year, like against opposing wide receivers in fantasy, for example, we know they weren't good against the running back position. And ultimately, I just feel like the Broncos are going to come out in week one, showcase their offense with Bo Nix in his sophomore season, and have a good overall offensive day. And I think that J.K. Dobbins is going to be a big part of that. And I also think that this is a game where the Broncos could get up early on the Titans and then establish the run game as the game progresses. And just don't forget, when healthy last year, J.K. Dobbins gave you double-digit fantasy performances in 7 out of 12 games last year, was still very productive in that Chargers offense. And I think he is still going to have plenty of productive moments in this Broncos offense here in 2025. So there is some risk here, but I think that J.K. Dobbins is a sneaky start who could absolutely pop off in week one. There you guys have it. There are 8 players set to go absolutely nuclear in week one of 2025 fantasy football. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. And when the playlists pop up, wherever I put them on the screen, we will have everything that you guys need for week one of the fantasy season to absolutely dominate week one and each and every week coming for the 2025 fantasy season. So make sure you guys check out some of the videos, get you guys absolutely prepared for week one. But most importantly, if you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever, drop them in the comments down below. I'll get back to each and every one of you guys as soon as I can. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.